Hey guys, welcome back. I have my first return guest to the podcast. Chatting with me today, everyone say hello to Sabrina. Sabrina is an awesome photographer out of the DFW area, and she's also a mentor. We are not really going to get into her bio because her previous episode was awesome, and it's episode 5. It will be linked in the notes. But good morning, Sabrina. How are you today?
Hi, friend. I'm great, and I'm honored to be the first returning guest.
Well, I feel like you're going to be on this podcast quite a few times, and so people should just get used to the sound of your voice. I mean, I'm like, how often can I invite Sabrina back to the podcast for a chat? We'll see if we can do it enough times to not annoy the audience. We'll see how that goes.
Okay, sounds like a good plan.
So for those of you that don't follow Sabrina and I, we had what we are calling a working weekend a few weeks ago. Now, I will admit, I think this goes by a bunch of different names. I have previously called them strategic planning weekends to kind of set the tone for what I'm supposed to do. And Sabrina calls them working weekends. And then we actually had this the week that episode 11 with Ashley Kang and her talk on CEO days came out. So for a couple days, I was calling it our CEO weekend. But regardless, it's a weekend where we got together, we stayed in a hotel, and we ignored everything except for each other and the work and the tasks that we had set down to do. So Sabrina, I'm going to ask you first, when did you start doing these kind of retreat weekends for your business?
So I really started doing them. It's probably been 18 months now. And the first time I did it was actually as an educator. So I never did this for myself as a photographer, although looking back, man, I really wish I would have. But, I really could have benefited from that. But it was when I was in the middle of building my first course and working through trying to launch for the first time. And my to-do list was very exciting, but also very overwhelming. And I just was constantly battling that mom guilt at home, even though I was very upfront with my kids. I have big kids. And so I told my kids and my husband what I was doing and what I was building and why, so that they knew what these extra hours were. But I still just felt really guilty. And so I told my husband, I was like, I'm going to check into a hotel for a whole weekend so that I can get absolutely as much done as possible and not feel guilty. I'm out of sight, out of mind as far as y'all are concerned, And it was a game changer. And I immediately said, yeah, we're going to be doing this on the regular from now on.
Okay. Because they are amazing. So oddly enough, I'm trying to think if my first one it was around the time that you and I were building our courses after we took DCA. But I don't really think, most of my tasks during my first one were like not specific for the education. It was like some education. It was some photography. It was some overall business task. Like I think I updated my website that weekend. I did all of those kinds of things. My first weekend, which I believe was January of 2020. Now I will say that was the first time that I legitimately booked a house, an Airbnb in downtown Denver, and invited 3 friends to come along. That was the first time that I legitimately made it a party. But other than that, I had already been in the habit of when I traveled for photography sessions, I would add an extra day on the end just so that I could relax, so that I could perhaps get a chunk of work done before, as you say, I came back to the real world and I had that mom guilt or that wife guilt about being holed up in my office trying to catch up from being away for photography sessions for 3 to 4 days. So it's interesting that you only started doing it for your education because I legitimately thought you had done it sooner.
Yeah, I wish I would have. There have definitely been pockets of time where I did what you said, like added a day, before or after a conference or something and utilized that time for work, but never an intentional weekend with the goal of checking off, certain things.
Okay, so you had only done one. Did you do one before our weekend together or had you done multiple of these?
No, I think I'd done 3 before our weekend together.
Oh, okay. So a lot. But our weekend was the first time that you didn't invite a friend. I invited myself, but that's a whole different story.
Yes, it was.
But it was the first time that you spent the weekend with someone else.
Yes, I've always just done it by myself, and I had a good little rhythm and a routine. But when you said you were coming, I'm like, yes, ma'am, let's go.
I mean, and we stayed at your favorite hotel. So I'm looking forward to the next time that we do one so that I can pick my favorite hotel and we can see how they can compare. How was the process for you working with me for the entire weekend instead of being alone? Like, how did your habits change? Do you feel like you got the same amount of tasks completed? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, I don't think I got as much done because, we chatted and we went to breakfast and dinner and all those things. Whereas if I was by myself, I would have literally gotten takeout and gotten up for the bathroom and otherwise just worked. But the benefit of doing it with a friend is the creative discussions and the problem solving that we were able to do for one another and the bouncing ideas. So maybe I didn't get as much done, but maybe it was better quality, or maybe some really great ideas or inspiration came out of it. So it was different, but great.
I mean, I will say this is the first time that I've done one of these where I swear my to-do list was longer when we were done than it was when it started, because as you and I were talking back and forth, I mean, I just had so many moments where I was like, oh my God, I need to do this. And so I might have just completed 2 tasks, but I just added 3.
Right.
I mean, which is a good problem to have, don't get me wrong. So we polled some people before we decided to do this podcast episode, and we asked them what kinds of questions they had. So one of the questions that someone said was, how far away do you travel? So let's be honest, I flew to Fort Worth to be with you. You didn't leave for that one. So have you ever gotten in your car and driven somewhere, or got on a plane and left the DFW area to do one of these?
No. I am, in trying to be respectful to my husband and the lessening of the spouse guilt, I want to be working as quickly as possible. And so I have always stayed within a 3-mile radius of my house, and I check in immediately upon check-in time on Friday. So, my husband's picking up the kids from school on Friday, and I'm checking in at 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And then I am checking out on Monday morning at 6:30 in the morning, so I can be home for the get ready for school rush. So I have Friday night and then 2 full days. So I've never gone anywhere. But like you said, adding on a day to a conference or a workshop or something, I've had some work time in other states and other cities, but not intentional whole weekends.
And so do you think that that's going to change now that you did it with me? Because let's be honest, if you're solo, there's really not a reason for you to waste a couple hours getting on a plane to go somewhere. But Sabrina, I have visions of our next one being in Palm Springs. So, so I'm just saying, can we build in some travel time there? But no, I mean, seriously, now that you're deciding that you might want to do these with other people so that you can bounce ideas off, do you think that you'll travel for them in the future?
Yeah, I could totally see that. Right now, I'm on a rhythm of doing them twice a year. So if I did 1 local and 1 travel, I think that's totally fine. It's a matter of, so for me, it's not necessarily where I'm traveling to, it's who I would choose to do them with. And this is a whole other conversation, but I don't think I could do them with just anyone. I think you have to pick wisely as far as people that are going to be as productive as you are and not a distraction. You know what I mean?
There you go, because we're both just as productive. Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. So one of the things that we got asked was what you prefer to work on. And so I think that might actually influence who you decided to do one of these two, because you and I both walked into this weekend with the idea that we were 100% not doing any client work. This was all 50,000 foot view of our business, working on email sequencing, website pages, all of the things that go into running our business with absolutely no client work. And so someone said, what would you choose to work on during these weekends? So do you think that that's going to be your MO going forward? Do you ever see yourself doing one of these for actual client work, or only for the strategic planning of your business?
Yeah. So my answer now, almost 12 years in business, is different than if I was only in the first couple of years. Now I don't need to build in client-facing type stuff in these weekends, because that stuff is on automation and it's functioning and I have editors to help and I don't need extra time to work on that. Maybe if I were going to launch a new branch of my photography business or something. But if I were newer in business, I could totally use that weekend to, like you said, work on website pages or refresh your website, do your entire year of blogging, write a whole bunch of newsletters. I mean, there are plenty of things photography focused that you could do in these weekends. But for me, I think it will always be coaching, education based work, just because that is the newer portion of my business. That's the portion that I'm growing and that's still getting tweaked here and there. That's the part that I'm really the most excited about. And when people ask, like, what kind of stuff do you do on these weekends? I think that's a really important point.
You stole my next question.
Oh, Sabrina. Dang it.
Go ahead.
I think it's really important that you pick something you're excited to work on. Otherwise, you're just going to like Netflix and lay around and nap. You know what I mean?
You purposely did not say Netflix and chill, which is hysterical. But like, I felt like you were avoiding that of Netflix and just lay around. No, that was literally the next question on my list, because someone said, how do you set goals for the weekend? And then what goals did you specifically achieve during our weekend? So I'm going to go first, guys. And I'm going to admit, I went to Sabrina with nothing written on a goal sheet, nothing. And she came with a whole book. So I know. So here's the thing. I knew for a fact that I was going to be getting to the hotel hours before Sabrina was.
That's true.
So
That's
my
true.
goal when I got to the hotel, was to walk through the door, put everything down, and legitimately sit down and brainstorm what I wanted to do for this weekend. So I had nothing on my ClickUp board before I arrived in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, then I came out with, a whole list. And so people are asking what goals we accomplished. So for myself, I had a goal of working and refining my Dubsado VIP day. Not really the offer itself, but like the emails that go out, the forms that people fill out, like, overall stuff, but not actually working on an actual client's VIP day. And then I had tasks that were identified to improve my course. So I was transferring it from one system to the next. I was writing a new welcome sequence inside of Flowdesk. So it was a big point of transition for me, moving my course. And so legitimately almost everything that I accomplished over the weekend was related to that. So I ended up refreshing the website page, completely getting the course moved over to a new course platform and actually having it listed for sale on the new course platform. And then I created a brand new welcome sequence inside of Flowdesk so that when someone buys the course off of my website, they automatically get invited to go to ThriveCart's Learn Plus, which is where the course is now hosted. And then they automatically get zapped into Flowdesk as a new student, and they get the first email of that 5 welcome email sequence. So, I walked away from the weekend ecstatic that was finally done, because I had done the bulk of moving the course over a few weeks ago, and then I just stalled because I literally had no time to connect the other pieces. So Sabrina, what were the big things on your list, and what did you accomplish when we were together?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to look at my list because it's been 2 weeks and a lot has happened. I'm like, what did I work on? I did a lot of focus on preparing for my podcast launch. It was just a few weeks when we met together. It was just a few weeks before that. And so there was a lot of graphic creation and email launch planning. And I had to build out my podcast page hub. And so all of those things, just kind of the last minute details of getting that ready to launch. And then I also had a flash sale run alongside of my podcast launch. And so I was preparing for that. The coupon codes, the email sequencing, making sure all of the links and the triggers were working, a lot of nitpicky stuff. Mm-hmm. I also had just had new branding photos taken. And so I refreshed my website with images in different places and just putting new headshots and new branding images in there. And then something that I hadn't planned on doing that we ended up doing, which was huge and got me really excited, was I was able to completely map out week by week what my 2023 mastermind is going to look like. And it started as a carbon copy of the 2022 mastermind, and it's still very, very similar, but we were able to map out themes and topics and guest speakers and all of the details, which is something I needed to do. And it has me really excited and inspired to launch that very soon. Yes, very
when this
soon.
podcast airs, it will be very soon.
And then other than that, I'm trying to see what else is on my list. I had a lot of little things, and just like you, my list got as long as it was when I left. But working with somebody who's in a similar space that you are and in a similar point in their business and understanding what we're both going through, it's okay that I left with a list that was as long as when I started, because I was inspired, I was motivated, I had some great feedback and ideas from you, and I had still gotten a lot of stuff done. So I think it's okay if you don't check off your whole list,
I think that's perfectly acceptable. And when you said that, it reminded me of why my list got so long, because Dubsado put out the new form builder. And so as I was setting up the course to be sold in ThriveCart, I actually went through and identified every video. Now, I haven't done it yet, Sabrina. It's been 2 weeks, but I'm hoping at the end of next week, I have to go through and record all those videos that have the new form builder so that a new student, when they pop in, they're like, okay, but that doesn't look like my screen. There's nothing worse than buying a tech course when you go in and you're like, that's not what mine looks like. So how do I do it in mine? So anyways, that was one of the things that just kept getting added to my list, and it kept on making it longer. So let's get to just a broad question. Like, what are the things that you have learned in doing these weekends? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about your business? How has it changed your goals for your business? Just what have you learned from doing these working weekends in general?
Yeah. So again, my answer now at this point in my business is going to be different than it would have been if I did this, 8 years ago. But right now, with everything being so focused on growing coaching and mentoring and all of those education pieces, it shows me how excited and passionate about, like, how I genuinely am where I'm supposed to be, because I always leave these weekends exhausted, but also wishing I had a couple more days because I was enjoying what I was doing, and I was inspired and invigorated. They have also taught me that it is 100% okay to step away from my family to pour into my business. That, yes, the very first time I did it felt frivolous, and I had to really explain to my husband why I needed it and, all this. But after doing it and seeing how valuable it is, it's valuable and it's okay. And yes, it's a little complicated for what gets left behind. I have to coordinate, pickups and sports and what the kids have going on and all of that. But it is so important to the growth and the future of my business, but it also fills my cup, and that's okay.
I mean, and I don't really feel like I have to justify anything to James, you know this, but when I kept on explaining to James, no, remember, I'm going to DFW this weekend. He's like, oh yeah, you have that client. I'm like, no, that's not that weekend. I'm just going to work with Sabrina. And he just kind of looked at me and he's like, what do you mean you're just going to work with Sabrina? I'm going to go, hold myself up in a hotel for 3 days and just work with Sabrina. And the funny thing is, you mentioned, you always wish you had one more day. As you know, I almost got one more day because I was in DFW during the great flood of 2022. I mean, guys, that's a conversation for a whole nother podcast, but I almost didn't make it home. I drove to the airport, was very grateful that I did not die in the lift. But there was a lot of water in DFW, and so I almost got stuck there for at least one more day, which, I would have just sat down and knocked out more of my to-dos. So let's get to because you mentioned the logistics are hard. So you already talked about the fact that, you usually start these weekends Friday, the moment that you can check in, and then Monday morning you're packing up and you're going home to kind of resume life. Someone asked, well, what are the logistics? What are the costs associated with this? What are the time? I'm going to go first because, of course, my costs were way more significant than Sabrina's. Right. So first of all, I hopped on a flight, which if you guys don't know, I'm in Denver. Denver to Dallas is a really easy flight. I actually paid more for this flight than I typically do because I can get flights to Dallas for $60 each way all the time. Of course, the weekend that Sabrina and I chose, it was not that cheap. So I think I spent $230 on my flight to get there. And then, of course, we stayed at the hotel. Sabrina stayed for 2 nights. I stayed for 3 nights. So I think my hotel bill ended up being somewhere around $800. And then we, had all of the food, which, I mean, guys, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't die of malnourishment. I mean, and we didn't really go overboard. I mean, we had a couple dinners out so that we could get out of the hotel and kind of, refresh our brains with some scenery. But all in, I would say that it probably cost me something around $1,200 to $1,300 to do it. Now, I will say, guys, we stayed at a really nice hotel. I mean, I can imagine that you can probably find a hotel that's not quite as nice and is still great for a much cheaper price point. I mean, I could probably do one of these weekends for less than, $400 if I just went to a local hotel here and stayed and ordered DoorDash or, whatever the equivalent is. But Sabrina, maybe talk about what it cost this time and then what it's cost you in previous times. Because, you said, well, you would just eat room service, but would it have really made a difference in the cost or the logistics?
Maybe I wouldn't have drank so much.
Ooh, she just put all our business in the street, guys.
No, we didn't drink that much. But I mean, ordering a second drink as opposed to maybe I just would have had one, cost-wise, the same thing goes. I have not always stayed at that hotel. The reason I choose that hotel is twofold. Number one, there is a Starbucks inside. I mean, that's absolutely super imperative. Crucial. And then number two, it has an outdoor pool, which actually Colie and I didn't utilize because it rained. But normally on a working weekend, I will give myself an hour of some vitamin D, get away from the screen, and go sit by the pool. Mm-hmm. So that's why I choose that hotel. But I have stayed at other ones before that are cheaper and, maybe Starbucks is a block down the street instead of inside. But cost-wise, this weekend was maybe a little bit more. Again, maybe the restaurants were nicer, but we didn't really spend. You know what I mean? So they're really not that expensive. If you're not flying somewhere, they can be really, really affordable. The other thing is, like you've mentioned, you've done an Airbnb before. You could totally do this in somebody's tiny little back house or any kind of tiny rental. What's that called? Like a studio rental? That's super cheap. A guest house. You could also, if you have a friend that's out of town or your in-laws are out of town, you could just go crash at somebody's pad for free. There are really creative ways that you could do this. Or if you have kids that, play soccer or travel sports, send your spouse on the weekend with them and you stay home. And just get everybody else gone. You could get really creative with how you do this for really inexpensive.
Budget, yes.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, we've talked about logistics. We've talked about how we set our goals, what goals we accomplished. Is there anything else that you want to kind of say about the process for someone else who might be thinking of doing one of these weekends for themselves?
I think it's really important that you pick a date pretty far in advance. If you think to yourself, I'm going to do that the next time I have a free weekend, you'll literally never, ever do it.
Never do it.
You will never do it. So I always try, and ours we kind of did relatively last minute. I mean, we only scheduled it 6 weeks in advance maybe, or 8 weeks in advance, which is the narrowest time frame I've ever planned one. I try and give my husband as much time as possible. And so as soon as we have sports schedule, school schedule, I am pulling aside weekends. Generally, I'll do one somewhere December, January, and then a summertime one. And so you were the summertime one this year. So I'll probably do one in early December to plan for, Q1 and everything.
And you've already said that you will not come to Denver in December, January.
Nope,
I don't know
hard
why
pass,
we get such
Colie.
a bad rap. I'm telling you, sometimes it is 90 degrees here. We just get such a bad rap being in the Mile High. It does not always snow here, guys. I promise. But I will say, when you put the dates out, you gave me a date in August and you gave me a date in November. And literally the only reason that I was no, let's do August was because I was thinking I had a lot of things that have just been sitting on my plate that I wanted to get done. And I also knew that my mom was currently here. And so I was just hey, Mom, can you stay an extra week so that I can go to Dallas? And I will admit, before she answered me and you and I had already planned, I bought Colie a ticket to come with me. Now, she wouldn't have been in our working weekend, don't get me wrong, but I would have brought her to Dallas and like dropped her off at, her cousin's house. Like, she would have been fine. But I just didn't want to wait until November. Like, I was excited to do this with you. And so I wanted to get it done like almost immediately.
Yeah. I would also say logistically, when you're planning, you really do need at least 2 nights. There's something about...
One night's not enough.
One night's not enough. There's something about falling into the deep work. It takes a little bit to get going. You can start checking off small things, which is what you told me. You start with some small wins and then really steamroll into the deeper work you need to do. If you only give yourself one night, you don't really have enough time to really settle in,
Well, you don't have enough time to settle in because of hotel rooms.
Right.
Like, if you check in at 4 p.m. on a Friday and you have to be out at 11 or even noon the next day, like, you have to sleep. When are you supposed to do the work?
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned that this time I only stayed 2 nights, but I was there full days.
Yes,
I technically checked out, but then I hung out in Colie's room all day that last day because I had a crazy early morning volleyball drop off for my oldest child on Monday morning. So I didn't want to have to check out at like 3:45 in the morning. So I was still there for the 2 full days and Friday evening. And then you said that you showed up hours earlier than me on Friday, so that's when you were able to create your to-do list. I always try and have a general idea of what I want to get accomplished going into the weekend, and then I do use that initial Friday evening time to kind of fine-tune my list, prioritize what do I have to get done, what could possibly not get done, just to kind of, fine-tune the list a little bit, get inspired, get excited about what I'm going to be working on.
Yeah, I will say, I don't mean to seem like I didn't have a list at all. I just didn't have a physical list.
Yeah.
Like, I had all kinds of things in my head. I was like, I could do this and this and this. But I purposefully did not sit down and make the list. Honestly, because if anybody that's listening knows me, you know that once I put something on a to-do, I get tempted to do it the first opportunity that I have. And so I really on purpose did not write anything down before I got on a plane, before I landed in DFW, because I was worried that if I did it on like the Tuesday before, I would be tempted to knock some of that stuff out now that I had clearly identified it as a goal, and then it wouldn't still be there on Friday.
Right.
I was really trying to avoid that. So, yeah. I don't know about you guys. I have this really bad habit of every time I pay somebody to do something for me, I immediately get motivated. It's like the housekeeper's coming. You feel like you have to pre-clean the house.
Yes.
Like, I feel like once I have hired someone to do something in my business, I all of a sudden get really motivated to start working on it all by myself. And that 100% defeats the purpose of paying somebody else to do it.
Right.
Same thing with this weekend. I didn't want to identify anything that I would be tempted to try and start before I got down there with you because, there's always more tasks, but that just didn't seem like a very productive choice.
Yeah. The last thing I would say logistically about planning it is give yourself a buffer day when you come back. It's just like coming back from vacation, re-entry into motherhood and being a spouse and being at home and laundry is a lot, especially when you've been in like peace and quiet all weekend. And so re-entry can feel hard, but also you may still be really inspired and energized on something that wasn't quite finished. So then you have time to like wrap it up and kind of finish those things before you move into your regular week.
Absolutely. And I will say, you went home to your kids being at your house, but I came home to Colie being at grandma's. So I did not get Colie until the next day. Like, I spent the rest of that afternoon working on a few other items. And then when James came home, we just had a nice date night. And then I ended up picking my kid up the next day after a VIP day. So, I really did have to give myself that buffer day because I had a full VIP day the next day.
Right.
I probably wouldn't recommend that to people, guys, but it had already been scheduled. And so I had already made sure that we were going to do it on Tuesday and not Monday. So, that's a whole other thing. Sabrina, this has been absolutely fabulous. I'm telling you, I am already looking forward to our next working weekend, whenever that is going to be. Is there anything that you want to tell the listening audience about where they can find you or any information? Because you have new stuff coming out when this podcast airs.
Yeah, so this is just a few weeks before my 2023 Mastermind will launch. It is called Route to Rise. It is for photographers, for female photographers. And this year the location's pretty pretty awesome. The guest speakers are pretty awesome. The themes are amazing. But basically, it is a 5-month mastermind where we meet weekly online, and then there's a 3-day in-person retreat built into the middle of it. So it's the best of both worlds. And it is unique from other photography masterminds in that what we work on in our weekly meetings is like heart-based work. And I love to tell my students that you better yourself and you better your business. And so it is things that tie in with your business, but it's also stuff that you just need for life. And in the retreat, we focus on photography. We shoot a bunch of sessions. We go through portfolio reviews. It's a really fantastic experience. And this year, there's only 11 seats. So if this sounds like something that has your interest piqued, Colie will share a wait list in her show notes so you can get on the wait list and find out when it launches.
And guys, this might have seemed like a really odd sales pitch at the end of this podcast, but it's really not, because this is the bulk of what Sabrina did on our working weekend. Like she said, she got all of the emails done. We actually brainstormed the entire schedule, like who was going to be in her mastermind as her guest teacher every month. Hint, hint, I am one of them.
Yay!
So, this is just like the product of what came out of a very productive strategic planning weekend between Sabrina and I. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Bye.